Thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar, Adaptive Mountain Biking, Trail Design for Accessibility and Reduced Risk. My name is Candace Gallagher, and I am the Director of Operations and Webinar Coordinator for American Trails. This is our 143rd webinar in the American Trails Advancing Trails webinar series. And this webinar is free to the public thanks to a generous sponsorship from New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation using Recreational Trails Program funding thanks to the Federal Highway Administration. And this webinar is being recorded. It includes real-time closed captioning in English and offers learning credits. Links for both the closed captioning and the learning credits will be in the chat box if you don't already see them there. And attendees will also receive a closed caption transcript and a link to the recording in my follow-up email. And the CEU quiz will be emailed to attendees who requested interest in credits in a separate email. You can expect these emails to be sent within 1 to 3 business days following the webinar. And we are saving time for attendee questions at the end of the webinar, but we welcome you to send your questions at any time during today's presentation via the questions box. So I want to thank the additional webinar partners that include the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, the National Park Service, as well as all of today's presenters. And we have Quinn Brett, who is the Program Analyst, Wilderness, Accessibility, Conservation, and Outdoor Recreation Programs with the National Park Service. We also have Mike Riediger, who is the CEO of Kootenay Adaptive Sport Association out of Canada. And we have Chris Orr, Trail Builder of the Education, Design, and Construction with Trail Solutions with the International Mountain Bicycling Association. So I will now hand control over to Quinn to start today's presentation.
Thank you, Candace. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I feel honored to be a part of this conversation and movement that has been gaining momentum. My name is Quinn Brett. Again, I work in the Wilderness, Accessibility, and Outdoor Recreation divisions in our national parks. And I am a person with a disability. I am paralyzed from the waist down, and I love using my off-road hand cycle. My co-presenters, Chris and Mike, will get into the specifics of trail design, but I thought it would be helpful, albeit boring, to give attention to some obstacles to understanding disability, laws, guidance and standards, ABA versus ADA, and how all of this can help guide your decision-making to include best practices and ultimately creating more seamless recreational experiences for all users. To start, some common language you might hear throughout this webinar or from directly working with people with disabilities is to that, a person-first language. Person with a disability is largely considered the default or most respectful terminology to use, as it puts the person first before the disability. Avoid using phrases like person who uses a wheelchair, wheelchair bound, or a person confined to a wheelchair. On this slide, which you guys will receive at the end of the webinar, there are a few resource links that I put in that give more breadth to the topic and also expand to many other disabilities of appropriate language. Mobility devices can include a variety of tools that assist a person with mobility, circulatory, respiratory, or neurological disabilities, from walkers and canes to braces and manual chairs. Manual chairs are fairly light and maneuverable. Some models have wheel variations or add-ons that can add electrical assist to assist the user if they have a little bit lesser of arm function or something of that nature. These are fairly light and maneuverable, under under 15 or 40 pounds. So easily to move along terrain in some instances. Power wheelchairs are entirely battery powered, controlled via a joystick or a sip and puff wand for those with little or no hand function. You sip and puff with your mouth to move around. Power chairs are considerably heavier, upwards of like 300 pounds, making them less maneuverable over chunky terrain and steps, and even thresholds of doorways. They are, however, sometimes more capable on steeper rising slopes than a manual chair because of that battery assist. Nowadays, with increasing technology, we have, in the last decade or so, we have a ton more options when it comes to wheelchairs. And we've have these newer inventions of these off-road wheelchair types. They have beefier tires, and they often use like a levered or a mechanical advantage. So instead of just pushing on the push rims of the wheel, you actually have these levering push bars that give a little bit more effort and control. And as you see, a lot of these models take away those front caster wheels or elevate them, as those front caster wheels, the smaller like skateboarding looking wheels in the front of your wheelchairs, are kind of like tripping hazards. They can get caught on a lot of things. And similar to those off-road wheelchairs, this is another variety of wheelchairs, commonly named trikes, or what we're talking about today, adaptive mountain bikes. Choice for these depend on the user level of function, comfort, and desired experience. They may be equipped with electrically battery assisted to accomplish more variable terrain as well. Why am I rambling about all of these mobility devices? Well, the terminology matters, especially if you intend on designing or building trails to include adaptive mountain bikes. This is a picture of me at the bottom, I love using my adaptive mountain bike. But a lot of people stop me on trail and wonder why I'm able to use this, or in a more negative way, tell me to leave because they don't think I should be using this on a trail. Most important, so these trikes are our bikes, but many of these models meet the definitions of a wheelchair and are legs for hiking. Just FYI, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, defines our wheelchairs to be any manually or power-driven device designed for use by an individual with a mobility disability for the purpose of locomotion. Furthermore, in the United States, our laws even speak to federally designated wilderness areas and wheelchairs being allowed anywhere that foot travel is allowed. The wilderness definition is the most stringent of the definitions. So just to help walk you through them, number one, the device has to be designed solely for use by a mobility impaired person for locomotion. So if you're confused as a land manager or see somebody on trail, you can actually just Google the manufacturer and see what the website says. If the website says that it is made for somebody with a disability, then it answers number one. Number two, in the wilderness definition, it says it has to be suitable for an indoor pedestrian area. I know that this seems kind of an archaic or odd terminology, but what that is referring to is that the doorways into pedestrian areas are 36 inches wide at least to get in for code reasons. And so our devices have to be able to fit into that doorway. So our devices need to be 36 inches or less, and the tread should be non-damaging to wood or tile, while suitable for indoor locomotion. So if it is 36 inches or less and has decent tread, like mountain bike tire tread is okay, then we can continue on. And third, if the device is battery powered, it is also suitable in an indoor pedestrian area. Think back to that power wheelchair. The only way that those people are getting around is with that battery assist. So a battery power is okay. Gas powered though would not be suitable in an indoor pedestrian area. I have mentioned a few laws, particularly ADA, which refers directly to state and local government and places of public accommodation. Another law, the Architectural Barriers Act, the ABA, refers directly to federal agencies and facilities built or altered with federal funds. These two laws are important to know because they have differing standards, particularly when it comes to outdoor recreation and our trails. So it's important to understand what policies, guidelines, and standards are. So standards are what is required. Guidelines are just kind of like an FYI. And again, the ABA and the ADA have different standards when it comes to that. If there are no standards, though, there might be guidelines or general recommendations or best practices on either side. So that's the importance of ADA and ABA and understanding this, where I'm coming from. When you are working on a trail, where did you get that funding from for your trail project? Is it a federal grant? Is it a state grant? Or is it a private donor? If it's a federal grant for your state project, is there a contractual agreement within that grant that says that you should be following the ABA, the Architectural Barriers Act? And if not, if there are no standards that you have to follow, are there best practices or guidelines out there that we could be following as best practice? Like on our federal side, we do have standards for our trail signs. And this standard is regardless of if the trail itself meets the accessible standards for an accessible trail. Every trail in our federal lands should have this type of trail information: the length of the trail segment, the surface type, the typical and minimum tread width, the typical and maximum running slope, and the typical and maximum cross slope. Again, this is a federal trail sign standard under the ABA, but even if you are a state entity, it would be best practice to use this standard as guidance, because on your side of the fence, on the ADA side, there is no standard to trail signs in that specific of nature. And as a trail user myself, this specific of information really helps me make a decision of whether or not this trail works for me. This is another example of a trail sign and how this looks, and it can look in many different ways. That takes me to the trail standards. The ABA, the federal side, does have standards for an accessible trail, which we are required to build to this extent whenever practicable, if the trail is designed for a hiker or a pedestrian use. But of course, there are exceptions to building to that, because our natural environment just doesn't allow us to build so strictly to those accessible standards. Therefore, there are these exceptions, just like this. The compliance is not practicable or reasonable, doable to the given terrain. But with all this new technology out there, what is doable? That gray area, there's a giant gray area between a paved trail and what is entirely not doable to any visitor. And with this new technology out there and these hand cycles that we have, we are a lot more capable and able to go on varying terrain. Exception 2 on the federal side is that compliance cannot be accomplished with the prevailing construction practices. So this is a photo of a trail in Rocky Mountain National Park in the wilderness area. And so mechanical devices are not able to be used on trail, but this stonework is excellent. And it was done because this trail is getting quite used, and sustainability wise, it's needed on this trail. So are we building to the best extent practicable, given our managed and designated use of that trail? Are we building to the best usability and sustainability? And exception 3, of course, recognizes that there should be a spectrum of opportunities that experiences to recreate on, from pavement to wilderness. Are we considering that spectrum for people with disabilities, especially given our knowledge of technology and capabilities, and the laws or guidelines that are out there for us to reference to? This is a photo of a hand cyclist going through a gate that is 36 inches wide, allowing the user to get to the trail. And as a trail user myself, that is often one of the first barriers that I reach, is the trail may be quite usable, but I can't actually get to it because of the gate being too narrow for me to get through. And the last exception is to be mindful of the laws that may conflict with your trails. So Endangered Species Act, National Environmental Policy Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, the Wilderness Act, and other things that might conflict. Of course, going above and beyond the standards help everyone. This is a photo of an adaptive rider narrowly tucking underneath a gate to access a trail. And as you see right behind on the side of the gate, there is a tree. So this user couldn't get around the gate like other people can just walk around and sidestep the gate. So he had to go under it. So being mindful as we're building these trails of the standards, but also going above and beyond. Is this a trail that we are building specifically for adaptive users? Can we go above and beyond the scope of parking spot, accessible parking spots or accessible bathroom stalls? Can we make a few extra? Can we be more inclusive in our signage on the trail? Can we start including icons that include an adaptive trike or adaptive mountain bike, showing that, I think on both sides, that one, that the user can be here, but then it shows other people on trail that these devices are acceptable and that what they are in the first place. So while there are no exact standards yet for building trails to adaptive mountain bikes, there are some excellent guidelines that are coming out, like what Mike is going to speak to and Chris too of Kootenai Adaptive and other places that have created some adaptive mountain bike guidelines here in the United States and Australia and elsewhere. And so while we don't have any particular standards, we can be using these guidelines as best practice available to us. Thank you very much for listening to me today, and Mike, take it away.
Right, thanks so much, Quinn. So why adaptive mountain biking trails? Aren't they expensive? There's no one in a wheelchair in our community. Why would we build a trail for like one person? No one wants to ride boring trails. These are just some of the comments we received when we started our advocacy back in 2018. While we might not have been at the best at addressing these statements or questions, things have changed for the better. In our eyes, the solutions are simple. Cost versus benefit. The surge in cyclists of all ages, backgrounds, social, economic backgrounds, and abilities. And of course, these trails are far from boring. So for us, inclusion isn't just about a moral stance, it's about being the only logical way forward. So let's get started in this, and I hope in the short time that we have here, we can help show some of the benefits of more inclusive trails. As Quinn mentioned, my name is Mike Riediger. I'm the CEO of Kootenai Adaptive Sport Association. Now, as the title implies, I don't just sit behind a computer all day. I'm out in the mountains, valleys, maintaining trails that our riders love, guiding, coaching, and instructing and pushing AIM-TB with our team as hard as we can every single day. And I'm very proud of the work that CASA and everyone involved in this has done to make British Columbia's outdoors much more accessible and the work we have contributed to adaptive mountain biking worldwide. Now, a bit of a brief introduction for those not familiar with CASA or our work. In 2018, the organization formerly known as Kootenai Sufferfest Society made a bold transition to become the Kootenai Adaptive Sport Association. Based in the West Kootenays of British Columbia, an area with a strong and organic interest in more inclusive outdoor recreation, that is where Kootenai Adaptive was born. From our first mountain bike camp in 2018 to the massive success of the 2021 Dunbar Summer Series, CASA has been at the core of many of the global surge of interest in adaptive mountain biking. Building the foundations of recreation and sport in a whole new category has been a lot of work, but with partners in the traditional mountain bike world, trail builders, landowners, sport groups, and other organizations like us around the world, the work of the past few years has been truly explosive. Specifically in British Columbia, Cycling BC's recognition of adaptive mountain biking as a sanctioned category within cycling is really opening many doors to explore AMTB more deeply as a sport. And of course, that further legitimizes the recreational aspect as well. So today we'll be talking briefly about how shifts in mindset make a huge difference in establishing buy-in. We will also briefly introduce our AMTB trail guidelines, which are available on our website, and potential changes in version 2.0. Also, with the building of adaptive mountain biking trails and programs, the need for greater understanding for instruction plays a big role in our operations, with resources available to help unify the industry. We'll chat about those options available now and the potential of the future as well. And finally, trails, education, and instruction are all part of the equation, but the best part is building a strong local AMTB community. Now, before anything happens, sport or recreation, first there need to be trails. Without access to trails, none of this happens. When we first started, buy-in wasn't always assured. It took us a while to find our groove and recognize the huge community benefits that these trails offer. Even just over the past few weeks, we've heard a lot from a number of trail organizations that their new adaptive trails had either topped their list of most used trails or made their list of top trails. Why is this, you might ask? Well, we'll briefly explore that question on the next slide. An area that opens up the ability of a trail association to open a new AMTB trail is funding. Funding for recreation and infrastructure that allows for greater access and inclusion. Not generally a funding source trail groups have had to think about, and accessing these new funding streams is a big selling factor that will lead to a number of positive benefits for your local mountain bike community. Another point that we'll explore on our next slide is inclusion and what that means as a residual benefit. When we first started in this realm, we certainly did encounter pushback regarding the potential higher cost of a build, and only having one or two community members that quote unquote need this asset. Well, it turns out the need is certainly far greater than any of us could have imagined. Now, someone might be able to correct me on the nature of this quote, but I believe it may be attributed to the WHO. But it says, much of what disables people from participation is not the disability itself, but rather the environment or aspects of the environment, external features of society created by people. That's a quote that I hope can help plant the seed of a bit of a mindset change, as it requires us to look at disability from a bit of a different lens. When I go back to the previous slide and my comment about the initial feedback being that work doesn't justify the need, well, this isn't so whatsoever. Our local trail association built trails with adaptive mountain bikes in mind, built for the equipment, and of course built for fun. My first ride on these trails, it didn't include seeing anyone on an adaptive mountain bike. In fact, I didn't see an adaptive mountain bike on one until we brought them out the first time. I will say this does change, and these trails have become an accessible tourism asset. Now, the first person I saw utilizing these trails was a man presumably in his late 60s, early 70s, with the biggest smile on his face and one of the oldest mountain bikes I've ever seen. By building this trail and these trails, it opened the Trail Association to members that would normally not be a part of this community, and those membership numbers are now over 10% of the local population. Since that time, we have seen a huge increase in active elderly and even a toddler mountain bike club that regularly use the AMTB greens. Another huge win is this also that the entry-level adaptive mountain bike trails chip away at economic barriers that some people may face in entering this particularly expensive sport. Also, after injury myself recently, I was unable to ride technical single track for a while, and these trails became a great way to stay connected to the sport while I recovered. Temporary disability is another area that's often overlooked. In a sport which sees a number of people injured permanently or temporarily every single year. Now, mountain biking is a fairly young sport still, where we are starting to slowly see more people begin to age out. Now, adaptive mountain biking trails, because of their build, are still incredibly fun trails, but they allow a little bit more lenience that keeps people in sport longer. One more benefit I'd like to quickly point out is that instructors also have been giving great feedback on these trails as they begin camps and clinics where there's children or new riders using AMTB greens with their width and pullout zones are fantastic tools to teach on, given the visibility and width to work with a group. What's the best way to grow your membership and volunteer bases? The answer is simple, it's inclusion. Building cycling communities from the ground up, toddlers on run bikes, rimming trails with their parents, grandparents, siblings, and riders on adaptive mountain bikes, all on really fun trails. Plain and simple, these trails are built for access, but also fun. Adaptive doesn't have to mean easy. It just means that equipment access was thought of in the trail's design, and riders understand that their adaptive equipment will work on these trails. Now, I won't be going super deep into details on the document myself, but I encourage every one of you to look up the resource on our website and reach out with any questions you may have on the first edition. When we talk about the basics of green adaptive trail building, focusing on how that integrates into your network and how width and/or passing areas needs to be top of mind. Without the ability to back up easily, making sure you are maintaining trail flow, whether it's single or bidirectional, is key. One area where we can run into significant challenge sometimes is uphill sections. An adaptive mountain bike that has electric assist in the front or rear drive has a high probability of chewing up the top of climb transitions. E-assist combined with the rider on crank or throttle can become an issue, mainly because in most cases, 3 or 4 wheeled adaptive mountain bikes, the rider has very little option to shift or unweight areas of the bike to avoid losing traction. So thinking about these transition plays a big part with trail sustainability as well. Our guidelines focus on the equipment and what the equipment was built to do, rather than placing much weight on rider function. What we need to establish in AMTB trails is that if you are labeling this in your network or in an app like Trailforks, that the person doing so fully understands that by saying this, they have vetted that the trail meets the requirements for equipment to safely pass through. Focusing on the success of version 1 and the feedback we have received has pointed on simplicity. Looking at version 2, we have taken further feedback, worked with, and will be continuing to work with organizations, builders, advocates, with an update that reflects the current nature of adaptive mountain biking and its perceived trajectory. As with training, instruction, looking at trails requires thinking outside the box for approaching situations with a different lens. For example, looking at brush height in corners, especially blind bidirectional corners, consider that the rider on most adaptive mountain bikes and the inability to have line of sight. A 6-foot tall trail builder may miss this, not intentionally, just that this person doesn't have the required lens for the situation. An area where AMTB green trails can be implemented in longer loops is a solid connector for your network. Again, looking at the standards doesn't have to be, don't let the big portfolio of adaptive mountain biking be a mental stumbling block. Just think equipment. And when we look forward to 2023 or 2022, companion documents are in the works that supplement the current document and its update, but also tools to assess your current trail stock and to see what is already AMTB friendly and how you can make simple, quick win changes. Utilizing traditional mountain bike instructors works, sort of. As with trail building, instructing especially requires an individual to approach their craft in a different headspace. Knowing how equipment and individuals have functional limitations and how to combine the two, as well as a dash of empathy to understand that not every fundamental skill has the same bar for utilizing a skill for everyone. Last year, when we partnered with the BICP to update and help build their adaptive level 1, it quickly became apparent that this was a deep topic with a lot of room for interpretation. The first thing we both established was that there needs to be a way for riders on adaptive bikes to have a pathway to become instructors. For me, for CASA and many other organizations, the ability to hire qualified individuals who represent their community is key for building the sport. Some of the things you can look forward to in the updated version coming out in 2022 are updated visuals that capture a wider range of person that take part in adaptive programs. There will also be updated language, resources, and videos. This new version was designed with the help of adaptive riders, organizations, sport policymakers, and advocates alike, bringing inclusion to the foundation of this program. Based on the courses we have run thus far, we look to successes in representation at each course and focusing on places where this material is most valued and needed. Nonprofits and organizations participating in and offering AMTB programs. From guides, instructors, and those involved in development of the sport category, the diversity of people involved reflects a large portion of the community. And when it comes down to it, this is all about having fun. Integration into the wider cycling community is purposeful and a huge part of our success thus far. 2, 3, 4 wheels, it doesn't matter. We're all out here looking to have a good time on bikes. From casual rides, enjoying nature, to competition on the world's toughest AMTB downhill super week. We're all mountain bikers just out for a good time. All right, so you have trails. Now what? The first step would be to look towards your local adaptive sport association. Look to them for support and understanding of the community that they already serve. Ditch any assumptions you may have. Your heart may be in the best of places, but working with people involved in this world is your best first step in moving in the right direction. So you might be thinking, hey, we don't have a local group that does this. This may be true. So why not look towards a model of integration and outreach? Resources are certainly out there, at your disposal from adaptive sport associations willing to give you their knowledge to build up your own instructor knowledge base through training with an organization such as the VICP and their adaptive mountain bike certification course. However you approach building a strong and integrated community with all individuals who benefit from the inclusion of the adaptive mountain bike trails is certainly up to you. But we can assure you that once you do, the level of stoke that comes from a diverse community is unmatched. To give you a better understanding of the core programming team behind CASA, we have myself and Cam working full-time on all projects right now, from free programming to sanctioned events in education and so much more. We have also brought on a number of part-time contract employees that assist with specific projects and events, such as Sierra Roth, the first female to compete at the Dunbar Series AMTB category, and someone we rely on heavily to help build up the amazing women entering the sport. We also have local AMTB legend Ethan Kruger joining our board of directors this year and joining us in 2022 as one of our instructors. Beyond the group you see in front of you, we also have a number of other wonderful contract persons, volunteers, as well as a fully functioning infrastructure wing that has its own list of brag-worthy wins and successes in making the outdoors more accessible and inclusive. So please reach out to any of us if you wish to learn more about this area of our operations as well. Now it feels like a decade some days that we've been in this world, but in reality we haven't been around that long. But when this is your portfolio 365 days a year and you've been working from the ground up, the amount of effort that current and former staff, athletes, volunteers, and other organizations have put into this, the output has been just incredible in a very short time. So in summary, AMTB trails conjure images of three-wheeled mountain bikes. But in reality, these trails offer so much more in growing mountain biking, your local outdoor recreation community, bridging gaps in inclusion, and making really fun trails. And that about sums it up, doesn't it? Fun, inclusive trails that fit with the feel of your network. When you look at your trails from a user or membership perspective, or even from public access land management, ask yourselves, how can inclusion work for you? When you build or plan your networks, give pause and ask yourselves again, who are we potentially excluding from participating in our mountain bike community? And how can we work to integrate more people? Are you looking to build your community, diversify your membership, be more inclusive, or any number of positive things? Adaptive mountain biking trails do come with a lot of these amazing benefits. Now, recognizing this can be a lot to take in, especially if you're not accustomed to adaptive mountain biking viewing within your region. So please don't hesitate to reach out to the resources that are already there. Lean on groups like CASA and other organizations entrenched in the industry already. As we roll into 2022, Kootenay Adaptive looks to be evolving into a national advocacy, education, and resource organization for adaptive mountain biking. And we invite you to follow along with us in this journey and get super excited for all the changes that are coming your way. So thank you again for joining us today. If you wish to learn more and have access to information and resources, our website and social media channels are a great place to start. And of course, don't hesitate to say hello at any time. And with that, over to Chris.
Good day, everyone. Thank you, Quinn and Mike, for that excellent information leading up to an overview of CASA's version 1 AMTB guidelines, and then some additional fundamental trail sustainability theories and how important and complementary both these guidelines and trail sustainability is. My name's Chris Orr, and I work for INBA Trail Solutions. INBA's been around for 30 years. I've been building trail for approximately 40 and am outdoors as much as possible on trail, on bikes, on horses, sometimes putting excavators into interesting places. And the way I do this is with my own adaptive equipment. I wear 5 different orthotics to be mobile. My employer, IMBA, International Mountain Biking Association, our mission is to create, enhance, and protect great places to ride. We've been doing this for about 30 years, and protecting and enhancing those places to ride includes also all the other users on those trails. So we've pushed the limits and methodologies for sustainable and resilient trail building, and some of those methodologies have been adopted nationally by the Forest Service, by other federal entities, states, cities, and other nonprofits. Here's just a quick list of trail resources that Candace will be including on the webinar webpage, and then the follow-up information. And to follow up on that, I'm going to point out a couple of resources that I think are important. The first one is the County of Los Angeles Trails Manual. This is one of the, in my head, one of the best municipal trail manuals out there that includes trail design guidelines, trail facilities from the parking lot to all the way into design guidelines, specs, drainage, and all the things that a city, county, state would need to think about when building a trail system or modifying their trail system. This is available as a free download, and the County of Los Angeles is supplying this to other municipalities, and it's a kind of a plug and play. They say that you can take this and modify it to fit your own organization or your own agency. So that's why it's a great resource. And then the Unpavement Project with Jeremy McGee. Jeremy is also an adaptive rider and has been working on a rating system that's based on if you need a support rider with you or not. And that being AMTB level 1, no challenges exist, so you don't really need a support rider, up to AMTB level 3, where you need a support rider or more to get you, or that mobility enhanced rider, through a trail system because of the obstacles and challenges. And then to kind of echo what Mike was saying earlier about involving people that are in the adaptive community in your trail projects and in your instruction, Jeremy is now working as a trail consultant also, and then together we built last year an adaptive skills course in the Gateway Green Park in Portland, Oregon. So Jeremy, myself, C2 Trails and Sasquatch Trails built this little park, or part of a park, in Gateway Green. And it was also the first time that Jeremy was put into a skid loader to become part of the build team. So including him in that build was incredibly important and opened his eyes to the possibilities of creating and building and maintaining adaptive mountain bike trails. INBA Trail Solutions has a number of books that are considered some of the trail sustainability Bibles. Trail Solutions goes through all the sustainability and resilient methodologies for building trails, which also adapt to adaptive mountain bike trails, hiking trails, equestrian trails, all other non-motorized use trails. Managing mountain biking goes into the needed thought and planning of creating and managing multi-use trails that include hikers, equestrians, mountain bikes, and adaptive bikes. Bike parks is a little bit out of the scope of this, but there's some methodologies, there's a bunch of planning in there that also applies to trail systems. And then the last book on the right is Guidelines to a Quality Trail Experience, which was a partnership between the Bureau of Land Management and IMBA. And it is a book that talks about extensively and goes into depth how you create trails based on rider experiential needs and how to fit them into the land, not force them into the land. That's available as a free PDF download, both from the BLM, the Federal Library site, and IMBA's site. Okay, moving into CASA's version 1. CASA's version 1 adaptive trail guidelines. First, we need a couple intro slides to define a couple pieces of the puzzle. Typical trail corridor. We have our trail tread, our trail way, which extends across the width of the tread. We have our downslope and our bigger trail corridor. We also have our bench construction, again, trail tread, trail width, back slope, and downslope. All pieces of the puzzle that we need to now pay even more attention to and plan for as we work on adaptive mountain bike trails. And then, as Tony Boone said in the mechanized trail building webinar last week or the week before, the first tool that any trail planner, builder, or designer should learn to use is the clinometer. And a clinometer is used to measure grade, the hill slope, and the trail grade when planning, designing, constructing, and assessing trails. The clinometer is important because you need to know grades, and you can't guess grades. You usually get grades wrong, and those grades are important to the approach, the departure angles for adaptive mountain bikes, the sustainability, the way water runs and flows across the trails. The clinometer is one of the most important tools for trail design, planning, and construction. And I'm going to repeat this slide again later. CASA's version 1, not going into detail here, but as Quinn described, there's a number of different types of adaptive mountain bikes or mobility devices, and CASA has described those on the left in their guidelines, and then on the right they've applied those different mobility devices to green through black or expert level trails. This is in their guidelines, and you can look up this particular specs and information on this on their website that Mike has supplied. So one of the first pieces of the puzzle is the recommended trail width. So most adaptive mountain bikes are around 35 inches wide, such as the bike that both Jeremy and Quinn rides, I think. And Quinn showed a bike going through a 36-inch gate. So being that the bike is 35 inches wide, we need to have a minimum trail width of 40 inches. So that bike can go through choke points, pinches, and then a minimum of 48 width required for general riding performance. And at the bottom right, related to CASA's adaptive guidelines, you can see that a green trail is rated at about 6 feet in width, a blue trail 5 feet in width, and so on. So the general widths needed and that we need to plan for in new AMTB trails, and then also while we're assessing our current trails, where we can improve the trail width or widen the trail width if it's appropriate for that trail, and we are either converting a trail to adaptive friendly or assessing and inventorying a whole trail system so we can determine where we can put adaptive recreation. So here on the left, we have Jeremy riding through a 48-inch width trail that he gets to a erosion or a drainage spot that wasn't built to a 40-inch width. And in this case, he needs a support rider to get him through that particular section of trail without tipping over and rolling downhill. So the important piece here was that drainage could be, and may be built to more of an adaptive width in the future to make this trail, which is rated as right now as a green trail, even more adaptive friendly, and an adaptive green trail. On the right, we have Quinn in her 35-inch width bike stuck at a pinch point. Now, when we're assessing trails and building trails, the assessment might be, well, this is one pinch point on this trail. Do we need to modify it to make it accessible? If it's one pinch point, yes, we can probably do that. If there are 50 of these pinch points along a mile of trail or a certain length of trail, that trail might not be able to be adapted to AMTB use. So part of the assessment project or process is determining, can we do this? Is it effective? Is this the best place to adapt a trail to make it accessible? Camber. So Camber is one of the most important pieces of the adaptive mountain bike guidelines and thought, planning, building, and construction process. Camber means how far the bike can tip before it actually rolls over. So traversing terrain that includes multiple obstacles is both a great challenge and a great risk for adaptive mountain bikes. So thinking and planning both in new trails and then assessing our current trails for rollover risk is incredibly important. And at the base, we should have full bench trails, which means the full width of the trail is cut out of the hillside, so the trail surface is stable and compacted. If we're using fill or half bench construction, which we'll talk about later, that outer edge is not going to be stable and will break away through user impact and weather impacts such as erosion. Many trails are built with a little bit of outslope to improve the drainage. So a 3 to 5% outslope on trails is appropriate and still works well for adaptive mountain bikes. But when we get into drainage on those trails, drainage usually steepens up the outslope of that trail a little bit. And we need to make sure that we place our drainage and construct our drainage so adaptive mountain bikes can travel through that with very little or no tipping or rollover risk. When we have multiple off-camber or tipping features in a trail, we have to determine if we need to take those features out, or if we need to build a ride around, or if we need to build up. One of the guidelines or best practices that I use when adapting trails to adaptive mountain bikes is that instead of taking many of the rollover risks out, such as breaking them down, I like to build them up. So the mantra I go by, or we go by, is build it up, don't break it down. Because once you break it down, it's hard to replace it. And in many cases, you can build or add additional rock or additional soil to get an adaptive mountain bike up and over a feature and still provide a great experience both for that adaptive mountain bike and the other users of that trail, both hikers, equestrians, and mountain bikers. So build it up, don't break it down in most cases whenever you can do that. And then in some cases, you might actually need to take, in extreme cases where there's no opportunity for ride arounds or building it up, you might need to take it down and take that off-camber trail feature or obstacle out. And then this last bullet here, again, build it up, don't break it down. Gradually transitioning those off-camber features by adding material so everybody can pass over them successfully. Some of those camber guidelines is exposure on the side of the trail with those tip over risks. Here we have Quinn on the right, who is tipped over, and it appears at this point from this angle that the trail is fairly wide, but there was a tip over hazard and she rolled onto the outslope of that trail. So in this image, that outslope was gradual enough to catch her where she didn't continue rolling down the hill. I know Jeremy has had a couple rollovers where that outslope was not gradual or wide enough, and he continued to roll down the hill for a significant distance and needed to be extracted. And I think there's a good number of adaptive mountain bike riders that have had that same experience. So one of the best practices and recommendations when designing new trails is to make sure that outslope is gradual and low grade and can act as a catch if you're not able to take those trail features or off-camber features out, and you're not able to increase the width of your trail to the ideal adaptive mountain bike width. So some images of Camber. Jeremy on the left going through a very technical rock section, using his body English to keep the bike upright as he traverses through those rocks. Very, very skilled adaptive rider. And so is Quinn here on the right. She's traversing some erosion channels, which is a trail design fault there, maybe a road fault, that there's no drainage built into this trail. And she has one wheel dropped into an erosion rut, and I think her back wheel also. Is this a challenge? Is it a fun challenge? Yes. Does it pose a tip over risk? Yes. In this case, she'd tip over into the snow, but if the snow was not there, the erosion channel was still there, she might be rolling downhill. So going into assessment and maintenance, we need to take care of our erosion and either redo or do trail triage on our trails to improve drainage, to reduce rutting, both for adaptive users and to improve the experience for all our other users. Corners, banks, and berms. Corners are also very important for adaptive mountain bikes. Adaptive mountain bikes are longer, meaning it's tougher for them to get around tight corners, and in many cases on traditional trails, on non-adaptive mountain bike trails, on non-bike optimized trails, corners or switchbacks are incredibly tight in diameter or radius, and the adaptive mountain biker has to take a multi-point turn, kind of like an Austin Powers turn, where they have to stop, back up a little bit, go forward, and do it multiple times to get through that corner. And as adaptive mountain bikes don't go in reverse very well, they have to do that manually. And if you're on a steep corner, it's incredibly difficult. So the point being that corners need to be designed with a larger radius and larger diameter now to allow adaptive mountain bikes to traverse through them and flow through them successfully with minimal tip risk. So the bank has, the berm or the corner has to be insloped a little bit to contain that bike, that adaptive bike, and reduce tipping with the appropriate amount of speed. This goes back to Mike's comment about bringing in adaptive riders into both the instructor and the trail building process and the assessment process to help us understand as trail builders and designers what sort of radius and what sort of speed and how they are going to traverse through the corners that we're designing and building. So ideal radius range for basic radius range for an adaptive mountain bike is 25 feet or 40 to 50 feet in diameter, which to many trail builders on this webinar seems like a very large corner. It is. Can we do that on our green and blue community trail systems that are now being designed? Yes. Can we do that at resorts? Yes. Can we improve some of our legacy trails and historic trails to diameters that big? In many cases not, which means we're going to have to do our best both in drainage and improving those so we can reduce multi-point turns for adaptive riders. In the shape of those corners, banks, and berms, we want to have a maximum slope of about 16%, as with a little bit of speed. With an adaptive mountain bikes, that keeps them from tipping over. If it's a greater slope, there's more tip risk, and if there's low speeds, there's less tip risk. There's more tip risk. So the lower the speed, if it's a forced lower speed because of environmental and landscape factors or terrain factors, we need to decrease the slope of those berms or banks a little bit. And for adaptive mountain bikes, a flat surface, a flat bank or flat bermed surface, as opposed to the concave surface, works better. It enables those bikes to turn a little more accurately and turn a little more tighter. And in general, for corners, we want to avoid flat or off camber, because that increases both the tipping risk and makes it harder for adaptive mountain bikes or mobility devices to get around that corner. So in most cases, the design and building new trails that are multi-use, that are going to include adaptive mountain bikes, we want to have a little inslope on our corners to help capture that bike and direct them around the corner, both uphill and downhill, with the appropriate speed and effort needed for them to flow through it downhill and to pedal up it when they're ascending. Here on the left, we see a pavered 60% corner spaced out between another one. These do have a concave surface, but Jeremy's negotiating them very well, and they're spaced out well, so there's a little bit of room between the two, and Jeremy can set up, or the adaptive mountain biker can set up between those corners and have a great riding experience. Rollers and grade reversals. So rollers and grade reversals are both changes in contour along the trail. Rollers are features, in most cases, rollers are features that are built to enhance the riding experience for mountain bikes and adaptive mountain bikes. And it's important when we're designing, building, and triaging for adaptive mountain bikes that the spacing between those rollers is longer than the length of the longest adaptive bike that will be on that. And that way we're not capturing that bike and creating high points. So if we capture that bike within the two rollers where the wheels are experiencing different forces, as we see on figure 6 there, the back wheel up force, front wheel down force, that creates a bucking effect, which, if with the wrong speed, can be dangerous and not that fun of an experience for the adaptive riders. But if we stretch that out, and the adaptive rider, the adaptive mobility device, is able to roll through that terrain successfully without high centering, like we have Quinn over here, high centered on a rock feature, not something that we built, but something that we could build up and modify a little bit so she was able to roll through that feature. And then grade reversals, which are part of contour trails and good drainage, which we're going into shortly, should not slow the mountain bike down, and they should be symmetrical all the way across the trail tread. So ideally, drainage and grade reversals do capture all of our users within them. They're so big that our trail users don't even notice that there are grade reversals there or there's drainage in the trail itself. So, and as both Mike and Quinn mentioned, adaptive mountain bikes and adaptive devices are heavier than hikers and mountain bikers. And on steeper grades or grades that are above suggested guidelines, and in corners, these heavier devices can have more impact or more use impact on the tread surface itself. So, and if some of those grades or terrain features are steep or abrupt, the heavier AMTB devices can skid or churn up some of that soil, which is a user impact and create some textures and some more maintenance needs. And one of the way we can get around that when we're designing new trails is to reduce grades, so we're not having abrupt changes or abrupt rollovers where tires may skid or spin, or we can armor sections of the trail that are going to be on the steeper side or abrupt. And different types of armoring that can be used would be stone paving or stone pitching. And in the top right, we have a trail that's above what our current suggested guidelines for trail sustainability is. I think that trail is above a 15% grade. And they armored it. It's an old road to trail conversion, and they armored it to reduce the amount of erosion and the use impact on that. So that's an ideal adaptive mountain bike steeper pitch, where even if the bike does spin a wheel or skid, it's not loosening soil that will be taken away later in the wet season. This can also be done in corners, as we saw a little bit earlier in that corner Jeremy was going around, which was paved to reduce the maintenance needs. There's a higher initial cost, a higher both in materials and time, but there's a reduced cost long-term in materials and time, because we as builders or maintainers or agencies don't need to go out and fix it every few weeks or multiple times during the season. So a number of different armoring techniques that can be used to strengthen our trails up for use impact. And similar things can be done when you think about equestrian trails or OHV trails and their impact, because they're heavier users also. So we need to plan, design, and construct to take the use impact of those heavier users. And then at the bottom right, even though this corner is not armored, it is a 4-foot wide or 48-inch wide trail that incorporates a number of sustainable guidelines to make this trail resilient and both usable by adaptive mountain bikes. We do have a number of grade reversals, both at the entry and exit to this turn, which work as drainage. So this corner is isolated from water flowing down it because it has drainage before and after that corner. The corners are all insloped, so that helps contain and direct adaptive mountain bikes and the use impact from other users' wheels and feet. So they're doing compaction instead of displacement of the soils. And then we have a flowing trail that is not forced into this landscape, but flows through it, being a little more natural. So it's not a straight trail that goes up and down. It's not forced in, it follows the contours. And these are some of the best practices, which we're going to go into here momentarily for trails. So trail experience and sustainable and resilient trails, both related and both now even more important in the design, build, and triage of trails for adaptive mountain bikes. A high quality trail experience is an experience where the users have an incredible time and have fun and want to go back. And it's not forced into that landscape, a trail system that's not forced into the landscape. And the needs, requirements, and experiential interests of the users were planned into that trail. And then that trail is also economically responsible and accounts for the long-term costs associated with maintenance and administration. So as we mentioned in the last slide, we've reduced our maintenance costs by, in one case, doing some armoring and really good trail design. And then to complement that, sustainable and resilient trails allow people to experience and appreciate those open spaces and our greenways and our parks and our federal lands while reducing their use impact on that landscape. They also create a positive recreation experience, and out of that we get additional stewards trail maintenance organizations and we create ownership. People want to be there. They want to care for it. If they can't be there, and if we don't put them in it, they might not care for that land and we might lose it. And then additionally, well-designed trail to be sustainable and resilient protects the surrounding environment and reduces maintenance costs and minimizes social conflict. So protecting the surrounding environment means that we've reduced non-natural sedimentation from our trail because our no trail tread is removed by weather events, and that sedimentation doesn't go down into the fish habitat below the trail. So we've not increased any impact there. In the same vein, we've reduced maintenance costs because we don't need to go fix that trail every rainstorm or every season or every 2 years because we designed it well. And then our design minimizes social conflict, meaning that we have great sight lines, we have great hearing lines, we've provided opportunity for passing, we have great signage that sets user expectations at the beginning of the trail, and the trail experience lends itself to people appreciating the trail and each other out there. All these components on this slide are explained in the books mentioned earlier in depth. And then the consequences of poorly designed trail is that we have increased use conflict or social conflict. We have increased maintenance cost, risk, impact on the environment, and it's not fun. So as you see on these two slides, we have two trails that are becoming widened and eroded because they weren't designed well and don't have great drainage. Even though these trails may still be fun to some users, they may not be fun to other users, and the sedimentation from these trails going down into our watershed and habitat below is pretty significant. We don't want that to happen. And how do we get around that? Well, we use the essential elements of sustainable trails. And one of the first things to make trails sustainable when we're planning new trails is we do planning, and some more planning. That seems redundant, but the more planning that goes into the design of a trail, meaning that there's more ground truthing, more GIS work, there's more conversations between multiple stakeholders and constituents and agency staff and ologists, we usually get a better trail on the ground that's going to be more sustainable and resilient. It's incredibly important to use a clinometer during that planning process. If you're designing a trail without a clinometer, don't go design it until you learn to use a clinometer, as Tony Boone mentioned a couple weeks ago. And you also want to build rolling contour trail and use grade reversals, which we'll go into momentarily. And then there's some general guidelines like the half rule, the maximum sustainable grade, the 7% average grade, and outslope and inslope to take care of our drainage and weather erosion issues. And then what we don't want to do is forget the plan, build fall line trails, which we'll describe here in a second, or build in low and wet areas. So rolling contour trail, it's not built on a ridge top, it's not built in a flat area, and it's built with a sustainable grade and incorporates grade reversals. So at the bottom, you see a trail that's traversing up or down a hillside in a straight line. That trail captures water, and the water flows down the trail, eroding it and removing our trail tread, creating additional maintenance and risk to our trail users, and shortening the time or sustainability of that trail. Trail above has gentle grade reversals. Water never gets to pick up speed and remove trail tread for any long distance. So each one of those little contours in the trail is a micro watershed. So water doesn't have the ability to pick up velocity, pick up sediment, and take it off the trail because we do it so often. Water drains so often, it can't take any tread with it. In this slide, in the image, we can see some of those gentle grade reversals working as drainage as this trail traverses the hillside and around the corner. Again, each one of those little grade changes, not big, fits into the landscape. It's more natural and creates micro watersheds. So the natural sheeting flow of water coming down that hillside continues across the trail instead of down the trail, taking trail sediment and surface with it. So grade reversals and contours, they're erosion resistant. They keep water off the trail. They keep user on the trail because we have a good tread surface, and increases our user enjoyment. So fall line trails are the way water wants to go, usually straight down a hillside or the steepest route down a trail. This slide on the left is just a 3% grade, very low percent grade trail, but we have a rut because it's a fall line going straight down this hill. We have a rut that's developed over time that is now almost unfixable without big machinery, which is an incredible impact to the environment around it. Same thing here on the right or in the middle. Too steep, fall line trail, water erosion, taking all that soil away. Poor design. We could have routed along that hillside with contour trail and avoided this. And then on the far right, we have our lowland areas, which are hard to drain and hold water and stay muddy. So ideally, we find every little bit of slope and grade change, little hummocks and hillocks to put our trail on or on the side of to avoid the water containment of low areas in marshlands. So again, the fall line is the steepest route down a slope, and water will travel down that slope and water will erode that slope. It'll focus that water. So the effect of proper trail design, when we take into account all the different pieces, here in this image, left side, we have rolling contour trail, which over an extended period of time still stays undamaged, usable, and a great tread surface. Here in the middle, we have flat trail that's containing water, it's eroded, muddy, and our users will start to widen it by walking on the hill slope above or below to avoid the wet, muddy area. And over here on the right, we have our fall line area that's getting deeper and deeper as we saw on the previous slides, to the point where it becomes unmaintainable and we may need to reroute that trail or close that trail because it's too impactful on the environment. Again, that clinometer, we could have avoided both the flat area and the fall line area by using a clinometer to figure out our trail grades and where the trail should be routed. And then as a review for this section, avoid fall line construction to reduce erosion. So fall line trails usually are also the steepest routes, and as we talked about with AMTB devices earlier, those steep routes are also take use impact from the spinning or skidding of those heavier devices. So fall line construction doesn't work for water erosion and or adaptive mountain bikes or other trail users well. Those contour designs help prevent that water erosion and increase our user experience. We incorporate grade reversals whenever possible. So on legacy and existing trails, we can do trail triage and incorporate or add grade reversals into them to improve drainage and that user experience. And then we avoid low and wet areas that will compact and hold water. Going into some specifics for sustainable trails, we mentioned grade a number of times. And what is grade? Grade is the slope or the percent of that hill slope or trail. And it's computed or figured out by rise over run. And the best way to do that is with even numbers. So if we have 10 feet of rise along a trail and a 100-foot length of trail, the grade of that trail or slope is 10%. Clinometer slide again. We don't have to do that math in our head if we use a clinometer. And the clinometer both has degrees and percentage of slope, which is the right side of the dial. And that's what we use when we're doing our trail planning, design, maintenance, and triage. The half rule. Rule number one for sustainable grades. Again, the same image of a low grade but fall line trail, and then an even lower grade and eroded trail. So the half rule keeps the grade of the trail less than half of the grade of the side slope. And following that half rule will assist in mitigating erosion ruts and runnels like this. And how does that work? What does that mean? The half rule. So here in the red on the left, we have a 30% side slope measured with our clinometer, and we have our trail at 10%. The fall line, that 30% we did not build on, we crossed the fall line with a tread that's less than half, meaning that water will want to continue to flow across this trail instead of down it. If this was 16% or 20%, our trail would start to capture water. Same thing here, 14% fall line or side slope, our trail's built at a 7%. If we were above, closer to the 14% or above half, water would be captured and run down the trail, taking our tread surface away instead of water sheet flowing across this. So trail grade is less than half of the side slope, half rule. Maximum sustainable grade. This maximum sustainable grade is determined by many things. Using the half rule, the type of soil, rock, grade reversals, your user capacity that you want to handle for your trails, and the difficulty level. So this next graphic shows some maximum sustainable grades for different soil types. So rockier durable soil, a 15% max grade. Max grade means that we don't want to build trail steeper than 15%, except for very short sections. And those short sections would be 50 to 100 feet long. Loamy or mixed soils, we're down to a 10% max. And then in sandy soils, we're going down even lower. The 7% average. So over the last 30 years of building trail all over the world, trail builders, IMBA Trail Solutions have determined that for most trails, a 7% average for sections of that trail, or at least 100 to 300 feet, is one of the most sustainable grades that you can use both for user enjoyment and erosion control. And within that 7% average, it doesn't mean that section of trail goes up and down. It means that it goes up and down within that 7%. So here we have an 8% average trail, but in order to have erosion control and grade reversals, we drop down, then we go up to 7, we go down to 5, we go up to 8, we go up to 9. So we're creating contours that all average out to 7%. And again, this goes back to soil types. Sandy soils, you might need to drop it down to 3 or 5%. On rocky soils, you might be able to push it up to 12%. But all the time, you need to have an average grade that you can figure out your contours through to make that trail sustainable. That's the short version. And that average grade allows for minor mistakes in alignments to be corrected or taken care of with contours, drainage, and some trail triage. So going back to grade reversals, when we're assessing current trails, legacy trails, historic trails that are designed to be linear like this, that now are eroding or disappearing because they contain water and that tread surface is going away. In many cases, we can go back and add grade reversals like this, which is work, but if we build them right, they are self-cleaning, self-sustaining, and will last for tens of years, compared to traditional water bar techniques. So grade reversals. And how that grade reversal works, as you can see a little bit of contour in this trail right here. You can see this grade reversal where water only gets to run this far and down this little slope before it's drained off. So our users pass through that grade reversal, enjoy that feature, that texture, that tactile experience and contour, while our water is captured and goes off the trail without taking any trail sediment or very little sediment with it. 5% outslope. The CASA guidelines mention this, and this is has been for years and years one of the base sustainability guidelines, meaning that the trail surface is not flat, but is angled out at 5%, allowing water to come down the back slope like this, hit the tread surface, and then continue across without going down that tread surface and again taking away our tread. Our 5% outslope allows adaptive mountain bikes to negotiate and travel through and on that trail by minimizing tip over risk. When we add in trail features, as we mentioned earlier, we need to increase the width or add the ability for our adaptive mountain bikers either to go up and over that feature or around that feature. And depending on the soil type, outslope might not always be maintainable, but it's a good thing to put add as one of the designs in new trail that helps maintain the trail until the trail becomes compacted by significant user use. But outslope does not take the place of grade reversals. Outslope helps trails in the beginning, but eventually it will fail and need maintenance. You need to take that or deberm that outer edge off to maintain outslope. And if you have grade reversals, you will always have drainage, micro watersheds, and the ability to get water off the trail as soon as possible. The effects of these design techniques, again, as we mentioned earlier, rolling contour grade reversals, we're shedding water, our users have a minimal impact of that tread surface, they're having a good time. These grade reversals, as we mentioned earlier in the AMTB guidelines, also are long enough and not steepled. They're transitioned nicely, long transitions, so our adaptive mountain bikes don't high center. They're able to go over those and through those because they're long and extended out with nice rolling transitions, which also means our mountain bikes, our hikers, our equestrians will be less apt to notice that they are drainage features and go around them. They will go through them and continue to stay on the trail. And then when we don't do that rolling contour design and we're in a flat area, we have erosion, we have water containment, and we have users widening the trail because they're avoiding those muddy areas. And then our fall line trails, similar thing, we have erosion happening. Tread surface is coming down and collecting in possibly a watershed below. And as that ruts or runnel gets steeper, it becomes more difficult for our users and adaptive mountain bikes to traverse, and they will start using or impacting the sides of the trail or widening the trail so they can negotiate through that section of trail. We want to avoid these two pieces by building really good rolling contour trail. In the review, maximum sustainable grade, and what is it determined by? That maximum sustainable grade for the most part, most soil types is 15%, and it's determined by the soil type, the rock content, the organic material content, the type of users you have, the number of users you're going to have, and the longevity of that trail that you want to build in. Average grade, base average grade for most soil types, 7%. 7% grade, and that allows us to build contour into that 7% grade and micro watersheds at the same time. So we again are shedding water and increasing the longevity and sustainability of that trail. All right, well, that is it for the content of that slideshow. I think it's important, as Mike and Quinn said, to include the mountain bike community and the adaptive mountain bike community and users in both trail design and planning. And whenever possible, consult with your adaptive users on their needs and incorporate their needs, feelings, descriptions, and observations into the planning and design of new trail, and then into the assessment of existing trail, where you can't or are not able to add adaptive mountain bikes in. Over this last year, on 6 different design projects across the US, in different cities, while designing the green and blue trail for these communities, we added the opportunity for the client to make these adaptive friendly. Most clients didn't know at that point in time that they could have adaptive mountain bikes within their trail system, weren't aware of adaptive mountain bikes, and were incredibly excited to be able to add adaptive programming and users into their trail systems by making their green trails adaptive friendly with adaptive friendly 4 to 6 foot trail widths and features that allowed either adaptive mountain bikes to negotiate through and over them, or provide alternate lines for adaptive mountain bikes to go around them. So the short story is we have 6 more communities across the US excited about adaptive mountain bikes and are now including them in the trail designs that they're working on and future trail construction that maybe will be happening in the next few years. And with that, I will give it back to Quinn and Mike if they have any additional comments on all of our presentations. And then if not, Candace, please take us into the next part.
Sure thing. We actually are over time right now, so we're not able to do live Q&A, unfortunately. So I will be working with all of the presenters. We've got some really great questions that did come in that I would love to be able to get answered. And so if you guys have any last minute questions you want answered, you can definitely reach out to the presenters. Their emails are listed here, and you'll also get this slide in PDF format in my follow-up email within 1 to 3 business days. But I will work with all the presenters for those questions that did come in, and I will get back to everyone as soon as we get those answered questions. And I'll also add them to the webinar's webpage as well once that's there. So thank you again. I really appreciate your time, Quinn, Mike, and Chris, for an informative presentation on adaptive mountain biking. And I do again want to thank the sponsor of this webinar, New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, using Recreational Trails Program funding, as well as the additional partners that include the Federal Highway Administration, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and the U.S. Forest Service. And if you are enjoying these webinars, I do invite you to consider donating as little as $5 by texting I'm for Trails to 44321. Your donation will go to the Trail Fund, which is a new grant program of American Trails. And we are excited to be working with Ford Motor Company and Waterford Press, as well as many individual donors as funders for the inaugural application process. And we will be opening up applications to apply for funding for your projects in early 2022. And you can learn more at our website at americantrails.org. The direct website is thetrailfund.org. And you can also email trailfund@americantrails.org, or just email me or our general trailhead email to be put on the list to be notified once applications are available. And as noted on the slide, I will select a couple people who donated immediately following this webinar to receive our new color Trail Boss mug as a thank you. And finally, this is our final webinar of 2021, but we do invite you to join us for the first batch of webinars in 2022. The first webinar will be online very soon, hopefully by next, and I realized actually that name on that slide is wrong. I apologize. There is a one on veterans and trails actually coming up on January 6th. I apologize for that. But there are 3 webinars taking place in January so far. So you can register for the ones that are online for free. Learning credits are also free. And all of our webinars will be free in 2022. So thank you again to everyone for attending. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and happy trails.